Have you ever stood in the soft glow of a sunset and thought about the seasons of your life? There's a stillness in those moments, a quiet invitation to reflect on where we've been and where we're headed. The truth is, as we age, each new day is an opportunity to rewrite our story. Yet, not all stories unfold in the same way. Why do some people thrive in their golden years, embracing joy and purpose, while others feel trapped by regret and decline? Picture this: an elderly man sitting on his porch, surrounded by the laughter of grandchildren, his face radiant with peace. Just next door, another man sits alone, staring at an empty room. What makes their paths so different? Is it chance? Or is it the choices we make along the way? Today, we embark on a journey together. A journey to uncover the 9 most common mistakes people make in old age that can quietly unravel the richness of life. This isn't a lecture, it's a conversation. Think of me as a fellow traveler, walking beside you as we explore ways to ensure your golden years are not just good, but extraordinary. So, as we step forward, I invite you to reflect on one question. What does living fully mean to you? Hold that thought, because together, we'll discover how to nurture your mind, body, and spirit in ways that bring purpose, joy, and connection into every moment. Part 1. Neglecting physical health. Mr. Lamb was the kind of man who believed life should be savored without too many rules. For decades, he worked tirelessly, often skipping meals or grabbing whatever was convenient. Exercise was a foreign concept. Why bother when his youth carried him effortlessly through long days? But time has a way of catching up, and one afternoon, at the age of 72, he found himself gasping for breath after climbing a short flight of stairs. His knees trembled, his heart pounded like a drum, and for the first time, he felt fragile. It wasn't the kind of fleeting exhaustion that a night's rest could fix. It was a warning. Later that evening, Mr. Lamb sat on his porch, looking at his overgrown garden. The weeds had taken over, suffocating the vibrant flowers he had once nurtured. It struck him like lightning. His body was just like that neglected garden. It didn't wither overnight, it suffered from years of disregard. He realized he had been blind to the quiet decay of his physical health, too preoccupied with life's demands to notice the subtle signs of wear and tear. In that moment of reflection, he made a choice. It wasn't grand or dramatic. There were no promises to run marathons or lift heavy weights. Instead, he started small. Every morning, he laced up an old pair of sneakers and walked for 10 minutes around his neighborhood. At first, it felt pointless. The path was short, and his legs ached more than they should. But day by day, something remarkable happened. The aches faded, replaced by a newfound energy. His posture straightened, his breathing steadied, and his heart felt stronger. Over the months, those 10 minutes turned into 20, then 30. He started meeting neighbors he'd never spoken to before. They'd nod and wave, sometimes even join him for part of his walk. The solitary act of movement became a social ritual, filling his days with connection and warmth. By the end of the year, Mr. Lamb signed up for a local senior marathon, not to win, but to celebrate the journey he had begun. Crossing that finish line was more than a personal victory. It was proof that change, no matter how late, is always possible. Physical health isn't just about avoiding illness. It's about reclaiming your independence and joy. In Buddhism, the body is seen as a vessel, a precious means to practice mindfulness and connect with the world. Neglecting it isn't just a disservice to yourself, but also to those who rely on your presence and vitality. Buddha himself taught the importance of balance, emphasizing that extremes, whether indulgence or neglect, lead to suffering. Caring for your body is an act of gratitude, a way of honoring the life you've been given. Consider this: when you neglect your physical health, it doesn't only affect you, it impacts your relationships, your ability to engage with others, and your capacity to contribute to the world. Mr. Lamb's story reminds us that even the smallest steps can lead to profound transformation. Walking 10 minutes a day may not seem like much, but it's a seed. With consistency, it blossoms into strength. resilience, and connection. Our bodies are not invincible, and that's a beautiful thing. Their fragility teaches us to pay attention, to care, and to cherish each moment we're able to move, breathe, and live. Like a garden, the effort we invest in nurturing our physical health returns to us in abundance, vibrant blooms, strong roots, and the joy of knowing we've cultivated something truly meaningful. Every step is a prayer of gratitude. Every choice to move, stretch, or nourish is a declaration of self-love. So, the next time you hesitate to take a walk, stretch, or choose a healthier meal, think of Mr. Lamb standing on that porch, watching the weeds choke his garden. Ask yourself, what kind of garden do I want my body to be? It's never too late to start weeding, watering, and tending to the life within you. The transformation may begin small, but its ripples will carry you farther than you ever imagined. Part 2. Ignoring mental health and cognitive decline. There was a time when Sarah Peterson, a retired schoolteacher, was the life of every gathering. Her laughter, infectious and warm, filled rooms and brightened spirits. She had a knack for weaving stories, often sharing anecdotes from her years of teaching that left listeners both entertained and inspired. But as she entered her 70s, something began to shift. She no longer picked up the phone to call her old friends, nor did she participate in the local book club she once adored. Days turned into weeks, and her daughter, Emily, started to notice subtle but unsettling changes. Sarah misplaced her keys more often, forgot names she once knew by heart, and seemed to lose her zest for life. One evening, while visiting her mother, Emily found her staring blankly at a photo album. Sarah's once sharp memory seemed clouded by a persistent fog, and when Emily gently probed, her mother brushed it off, saying, "Oh, I'm just getting old. That's how it is." But Emily wasn't convinced. The Sarah she knew was more than her age, more than the stereotype of natural decline. There had to be a way to reignite the light that once burned so brightly within her. The first step was a simple but significant conversation. Emily sat down with her mother and asked, "What makes you happiest? Mom, what did you love doing when you felt most alive?" Sarah thought for a moment, her lips curling into a faint smile. "Telling stories," she replied. "I used to love telling stories." From that spark of nostalgia, Emily devised a plan to help her mother reconnect with her passions and keep her mind active. They started small. Emily brought Sarah a beautiful leather-bound journal and encouraged her to write down her memories, stories from her childhood, moments from her teaching career, and even the silly little incidents that made her laugh. At first, Sarah hesitated. "My handwriting's not as steady as it used to be," she lamented. But Emily reminded her that the words mattered more than the penmanship. Slowly, the pages began to fill with Sarah's stories, each one a thread in the tapestry of her life. Writing wasn't the only change. Emily introduced her mother to crossword puzzles, something Sarah had always enjoyed in her younger years. They sat together at the kitchen table, solving clues and laughing at their mistakes. The puzzles weren't just a pastime. They became a workout for Sarah's mind, challenging her memory and encouraging her to think critically. Over time, the fog seemed to lift, replaced by a sharper focus and a rekindled confidence. Sarah also ventured out into the community once more, though not without some initial reluctance. Emily suggested attending a weekly storytelling circle at the local library. Nervous but intrigued, Sarah decided to give it a try. On her first visit, she shared a story about a mischievous student from her teaching days. The room erupted in laughter, and for the first time in years, Sarah felt truly seen and heard. Week after week, she returned, finding joy not only in telling her own stories but in listening to others. What started as small, hesitant steps blossomed into a vibrant new chapter in Sarah's life. Her memory improved not in a miraculous, movie-like way, but gradually and meaningfully. More importantly, her sadness gave way to a renewed sense of purpose. She began to see aging not as an inevitable decline, but as an opportunity to nurture her mind and soul in ways she had never considered before. In Buddhism, the mind is often compared to a garden. Left untended, can become overrun with weeds, negative thoughts, forgetfulness, and lethargy, but with care and attention, it flourishes. Sarah's journey was a testament to this wisdom. Her journal became her way of planting seeds. Her puzzles were the water that kept them growing, and her community engagements were the sunlight that helped her bloom. The Buddha taught that mindfulness is the key to liberation, not just from suffering but from the misconceptions that limit us. Sarah's belief that her forgetfulness and sadness were just part of aging was a misconception, a weed in the garden of her mind. By challenging that belief and taking proactive steps to care for her mental health, she reclaimed her sense of self and found joy in the present moment. For those who may feel that their mental sharpness or emotional well-being is slipping away, Sarah's story offers a powerful reminder. It's never too late to tend to the mind. The smallest actions, a pen on paper, puzzle solved, a story shared, can become transformative. Each choice to engage, to connect, and to create is a step toward clarity and fulfillment. Sarah now keeps her journal on her bedside table, its pages brimming with stories old and new. She says it reminds her that her life isn't defined by what she's forgotten, but by the memories she continues to cherish and create. And as she often tells her storytelling circle, the mind is like a lantern. Keep it lit, and it will guide you through even the darkest of nights. Part 3: Poor Financial Planning. Thomas Garcia always prided himself on living for the moment. Growing up in a hardworking but carefree household, he learned to enjoy life as it came. His philosophy was simple: money was meant to be spent, not hoarded. He worked as a skilled carpenter for most of his life, earning a decent income and supporting his family with a warm generosity that earned him admiration. Yet, Thomas's financial habits reflected his philosophy. He never thought much about savings or long-term plans. He was the kind of man who believed that tomorrow would take care of itself. That sense of confidence carried him well into his 60s. Retirement seemed like a distant concept, one he assumed would work itself out with his Social Security benefits and a modest pension. But when Thomas turned 68, a sudden health crisis hit. A diagnosis of early-stage diabetes meant frequent medical visits, expensive prescriptions, and dietary adjustments. He soon realized that his savings, what little he had, were dwindling rapidly. For the first time in his life, Thomas felt fear creeping into his usually optimistic heart. The financial strain began to affect his daily life. Small pleasures like dining out with friends or buying gifts for his grandchildren now felt like burdens. He withdrew from social activities, embarrassed by his inability to keep up with the life he'd once enjoyed so freely. It wasn't just about money. It was about the loss of independence and the looming question of whether he'd have to rely on his children to make ends meet. For a man who had always valued his self-reliance, this was a deeply humbling experience. One evening, as Thomas sifted through a pile of medical bills, his daughter Rebecca gently suggested seeking help from a financial advisor. At first, Thomas resisted. "I've made it this far on my own," he said. But deep down, he knew that his way of handling money, or rather, not handling it, was no longer sustainable. Reluctantly, he agreed to meet with a planner, a young professional named Alicia who immediately struck Thomas as patient and understanding. Their first meeting wasn't easy. Alicia asked Thomas to lay everything on the table: his income, expenses, debts, and assets. Seeing the numbers in black and white was a wake-up call. "Thomas," Alicia said gently, "this isn't about cutting out the joys in your life. It's about creating a plan so you can keep enjoying them without fear." That perspective shifted something in Thomas. Financial planning, he realized, wasn't about restriction. It was about freedom, the freedom to live without constant worry. Together, they crafted a budget that prioritized his essential needs while still allowing for small indulgences. Alicia also encouraged Thomas to set aside a portion of his income for an emergency fund, something he'd never considered before. The changes were incremental, but over time, they brought a sense of stability that Thomas hadn't felt in years. He even started exploring ways to reduce his medical costs, such as switching to generic medications and seeking support programs for seniors. What surprised Thomas most was how much he enjoyed the process. Managing his finances gave him a newfound sense of control and clarity. He began tracking his spending with the same meticulous attention he once gave to crafting furniture. Budgeting became less of a chore and more of a daily practice, a way of aligning his actions with his values. The relief of knowing that he was on solid ground allowed him to return to the social life he had missed, reconnecting with friends and family without the cloud of financial worry hanging over him. But Thomas's transformation didn't stop there. Reflecting on his own missteps, he felt a growing desire to share his newfound wisdom with others, particularly younger generations. He began volunteering at a local community center, teaching basic financial literacy to teenagers and young adults. His workshops weren't about complicated investment strategies. They were about the fundamentals: budgeting, saving, and understanding the difference between wants and needs. Thomas often shared his story, not to dwell on his mistakes, but to inspire others to avoid them. In those sessions, Thomas found a renewed sense of purpose. His experiences, once a source of shame, became a tool for connection and education. He took pride in knowing that his lessons could help others build more secure futures, sparing them the fear and uncertainty he had faced. Financial planning, he realized, wasn't just about numbers, it was about values, priorities, and creating a life that aligned with both. From a Buddhist perspective, Thomas's journey reflects the principle of mindfulness. Buddha taught that suffering often arises from our inability to see things clearly and act with intention. For years, Thomas's financial habits were driven by impulse and avoidance, rooted in the assumption that the future would take care of itself. By facing his reality with honesty and compassion, he was able to take control of his circumstances and transform them. In Buddhism, the concept of right effort emphasizes the importance of steady, purposeful actions that lead to positive outcomes. Thomas's small but consistent steps, meeting with a planner, building a budget, teaching others, embody this principle. His story reminds us that it's never too late to change course. No matter how daunting the task may seem, the heart of Thomas's transformation lies in the understanding that financial planning isn't about deprivation. It's about empowerment. It's about creating a foundation that allows you to live with dignity, freedom, and joy. In the same way that a carpenter carefully measures and cuts each piece of wood to create something strong and beautiful, we too can craft our lives with care and intention. As Thomas often tells his workshop attendees, it's not about being perfect with money, it's about being thoughtful. Every dollar is a choice, and every choice shapes your future. His words resonate not just as practical advice, but as a deeper truth. The act of planning is itself an expression of hope, a way of honoring the life we've been given and the people we care about. Thomas's journey reminds us that while money may not buy happiness, the peace of mind that comes from financial stability is invaluable. By embracing mindful financial habits, we can create lives that are not only secure but rich in meaning and connection. And in doing so, we honor both ourselves and the world around us. Part 4: Living in the Past and Resisting Change. Margaret Lee was known in her family as the storyteller. Whenever relatives gathered, it was her vivid recounting of the good old days that mesmerized everyone. She spoke of dances in grand halls, handwritten letters that carried emotions across miles, and the joy of long, face-to-face conversations uninterrupted by buzzing devices. To her, those days were a golden era, and the present, with its screens and constant notifications, felt like an alien world she didn't want to belong to. But as the years passed, Margaret noticed something unsettling. While she found comfort in reminiscing about the past, it also left her feeling increasingly disconnected from her family. Her grandchildren, though affectionate, often had their heads buried in smartphones. Family dinners were quieter, interrupted by quick text messages or selfies. It was as if she were on one side of a vast divide, with the rest of the world moving farther and farther away. One Christmas, Margaret's granddaughter Lily gave her a small, neatly wrapped box. Inside was a tablet. "What am I supposed to do with this?" Margaret asked, her tone laced with skepticism. Lily grinned and said, "It's not just a gadget, Grandma. It's a way to keep us connected." Margaret wasn't convinced. To her, the tablet symbolized everything she disliked about modern life: fast, impersonal, and, above all, unfamiliar. For weeks, the tablet sat untouched on her kitchen counter. Margaret was determined not to let it invade her life. But one quiet afternoon, curiosity got the better of her. She turned it on, fumbling with the buttons until she managed to open a simple app Lily had pre-installed. A video calling program. With a few taps, Lily's face appeared on the screen, her smile beaming. "You did it, Grandma!" Lily exclaimed. Margaret couldn't help but laugh. For the first time, the screen felt less like a barrier and more like a bridge. Encouraged by Lily, Margaret began exploring the tablet further. Lily introduced her to online tutorials, including one that taught her how to digitize old family recipes. Margaret had always been known for her cooking. Her dumplings were legendary. Now, she could share them with the world. With Lily's help, she started a small cooking blog, complete with videos where she demonstrated her techniques. First, it was daunting. The camera felt unnatural, and she stumbled over her words. But over time, Margaret found her rhythm, sharing not just recipes but the stories behind them, the traditions, the memories, the love that went into every dish. To her surprise, the blog gained followers, many of them young people eager to learn the art of traditional cooking. They left comments expressing gratitude and admiration, and Margaret found herself energized by the connections she was building. For the first time in years, she felt not just relevant but vital, a keeper of culture, bridging generations through food and storytelling. Margaret's transformation wasn't just about mastering technology. It was about embracing change and finding joy in it. Her resistance to the tablet wasn't merely about the device itself but what it represented: the fear of losing her identity in a world she no longer recognized. Yet, by stepping out of her comfort zone, she discovered that the past and the present didn't have to compete. They could coexist beautifully. Buddhist philosophy often speaks of impermanence, the idea that life is in a constant state of flux. Clinging to the past, as comforting as it may seem, creates suffering because it resists the natural flow of life. Margaret's initial resistance to change mirrored this struggle, but her journey showed her that impermanence isn't something to fear, it's something to embrace. By letting go of her nostalgia-driven resistance, she found new ways to honor her past while thriving in the present. Margaret's story reminds us that life is like a river, always flowing forward. When we cling to the banks, we create turbulence, struggling against the current. But when we let go and allow ourselves to move with the flow, we discover new streams of joy and connection. Change doesn't erase who we are, it enhances it, adding layers of richness and depth to our lives. Today, Margaret's tablet sits proudly on her kitchen counter, no longer a symbol of resistance but a gateway to the world. Her blog continues to grow, and her grandchildren often join her in making videos, blending their youthful energy with her timeless wisdom. Margaret often says, "I thought I'd lose myself in all this change, but instead, I found a bigger, brighter version of me." Her journey teaches us that resisting change only isolates us, both from others and from ourselves. But when we open our hearts and minds to new possibilities, we don't lose our past, we expand it. In embracing the unfamiliar, we find that life's greatest treasures often lie just beyond our comfort zones. Part 5. Lack of purpose and social connections. James Collins had always been a man of routine. For 40 years, he woke up at 6 a.m., drank his coffee, and headed off to his job as a machinist. He took pride in his work. There was satisfaction in the precision, the hum of the machines, and the camaraderie with his co-workers. Retirement was supposed to be a well-earned reward, a time to rest and enjoy the fruits of his labor. But when the alarm clock no longer dictated his mornings, James found himself adrift. The first few weeks felt like a vacation, but the novelty quickly wore off. The days stretched endlessly, unfilled and silent. His wife, Claire, noticed the change. James, once energetic and engaged, now spent his days watching television or puttering around the house. He stopped calling old friends and avoided social gatherings. The isolation crept in, and with it came a sense of purposelessness. "What am I even good for now?" he muttered one evening, not realizing Claire had overheard. Those words broke her heart. One day, Claire came home with a flyer she had picked up at the local library. It advertised a charity project in need of volunteers to repair bicycles for underprivileged children. She handed it to James, saying, "This might be something for you." First, James scoffed. "What do I know about kids?" he said. But Claire, ever patient, encouraged him to at least attend one meeting. "It's not about the kids, James. It's about you. And I think you might surprise yourself." Reluctantly, he went. The meeting was in a modest community center, and James felt out of place among the energetic volunteers, most of whom were younger than his children. But then the project coordinator handed him an old, rusted bicycle and asked if he could fix it. James inspected it, his hands remembering skills he hadn't used in years. By the end of the session, he had the bike working like new. The gratitude on the coordinator's face stirred something in him. Over the next few weeks, James returned to the project, finding solace in the familiar rhythm of tools and problem solving. He began to connect with the younger volunteers, sharing tips and tricks he'd learned during his decades in the shop. They started seeking him out for advice, calling him Mr. James with a respect that made him stand a little taller. Slowly but surely, James felt a spark reignite, a sense of value and belonging he hadn't realized he missed so deeply. As the weeks turned into months, James became a central figure in the project. He didn't just repair bicycles, he mentored the younger volunteers, teaching them not just the mechanics of the work, but also the patience and pride that came with doing something well. In turn, they taught him how to use social media to promote the charity, a skill he had previously dismissed as irrelevant. It was a mutual exchange of knowledge and energy that left both sides richer. The joy wasn't just in the work, but in the connections. James found himself laughing again, sharing stories, and building friendships that bridged generations. At home, Claire noticed the change. "You're humming," she remarked one evening as he worked on a bike in their garage. James hadn't even realized it. The emptiness that once haunted him had been replaced by purpose and connection. From a Buddhist perspective, James's journey reflects the importance of interdependence. In Buddhism, the concept of sangha, or community, is a cornerstone of spiritual practice. It teaches that no one is an island, we are all interconnected, and our growth and happiness often come through our relationships with others. James's isolation had cut him off from this essential truth, but his involvement in the charity project reconnected him to the web of human connection. The Buddha also spoke about right livelihood, not just in the context of earning a living, but in engaging in work that uplifts and benefits others. For James, repairing bicycles wasn't just a task. It was an offering, a way of giving back to the community and finding fulfillment in the process. His story reminds us that purpose doesn't retire with us. It evolves. Sometimes it takes a nudge, a flyer, a kind word, a new opportunity to rediscover it. Through his work with the charity, James found more than a hobby. He found himself. His days were no longer defined by endless hours of television, but by the satisfaction of knowing he was making a difference. The laughter of the children receiving their repaired bicycles, the gratitude of the parents, and the camaraderie with his fellow volunteers filled his life with meaning. When James reflects on his journey, he often tells people, "I thought I had nothing left to give, but it turns out I just needed to be asked." His story is a reminder that purpose is not something we lose. it's something we rediscover, often in the most unexpected places. By stepping out of his comfort zone and opening himself to new connections, James not only enriched his own life but also touched the lives of countless others. In doing so, he proved that the threads of community and purpose are what truly make life worth living. Part 6. Failure to embrace technology. Susan Tran often described herself as a woman of simpler times. "Technology isn't for people like me," she would say, dismissing her grandchildren's pleas to join the digital age. For years, she resisted every smartphone upgrade, scoffing at online banking and waving off invitations to social media platforms. Her world was grounded in the tangible, handwritten letters, face-to-face conversations, and flipping through photo albums on lazy afternoons. But when her son David moved across the country for work, Susan felt the weight of her resistance more acutely. David had always been her anchor, visiting every Sunday for coffee and conversation. His relocation left a void, one that Susan couldn't fill with the occasional phone call. She missed the small, everyday moments, seeing his smile, hearing about his day, and sharing updates about her life. The distance felt vast, not just in miles but in connection. One day, while sitting at the kitchen table with her granddaughter Lily, Susan confided in her. "I miss David," she said softly, tracing the rim of her teacup. "It's not the same over the phone." Lily, ever tech-savvy and patient, smiled and said, "Grandma, what if you could see him whenever you wanted? Let me show you something." She pulled out her tablet and opened a video call app. Within moments, David's face appeared on the screen, his grin lighting up the room. "Mom, you look great," he exclaimed. Susan was startled, overwhelmed, and a little emotional. It wasn't perfect, but it was a glimpse of what she'd been missing. Lily suggested setting up Susan's own tablet so she could connect with David and the rest of the family. First, Susan resisted. The thought of navigating an unfamiliar device felt daunting. "I'm too old to learn all this," she insisted. But Lily gently reminded her, "Grandma, it's not about the technology. It's about staying close to the people you love." With Lily's guidance, Susan took her first hesitant steps into the digital world. They started simple, learning how to turn the tablet on and open the video call app. Lily was patient, explaining each step as if teaching an art form. Over time, Susan grew more confident. She began initiating video calls, delighting in the sight of her son, daughter-in-law, and even her faraway cousins. The tablet didn't just connect her with family, it opened new doors. Susan discovered virtual book clubs, where she met people from around the world who shared her love for historical fiction. She joined a group of senior citizens who exchanged cooking tips and recipes over video chat, laughing as they compared their culinary creations. One evening, after hosting her first virtual gathering, Susan looked at the screen and marveled. "I never thought I'd have so much fun with people I've never met in person." Her world, once confined to the walls of her home, expanded in ways she hadn't imagined. The tablet became a bridge to connections she thought were lost, and to opportunities she didn't know existed. Susan began to understand that technology wasn't just a tool, it was a lifeline, a means of enriching her life rather than complicating it. From a Buddhist perspective, Susan's journey reflects the principle of interdependence, a core teaching that emphasizes the interconnectedness of all things. In resisting technology, Susan had inadvertently isolated herself, cutting off avenues for connection and engagement. But by embracing the tools available to her, she re-entered the flow of life, finding joy and meaning in relationships both old and new. The Buddha taught that clinging to the past or fearing the unknown often leads to suffering. Susan's initial reluctance stemmed from this fear, a fear of change, of making mistakes, of feeling inadequate. But by confronting her discomfort and stepping into the unfamiliar, she discovered that growth lies just beyond our resistance. Today, Susan is the first to encourage her peers to give technology a chance. She jokes, "If I can figure it out, anyone can." Her mornings often begin with a video chat over coffee, and her evenings are filled with virtual book club discussions or online cooking sessions. The tablet, once a source of intimidation, has become an integral part of her daily life. Susan's story reminds us that technology, when embraced with an open heart, can be a powerful tool for connection and growth. It's not about the devices themselves, but about the relationships they foster and the opportunities they create. By crossing the bridge that technology offers, Susan didn't just stay connected. She found a vibrant, dynamic community that enriched her life in unexpected ways. As Susan often tells her friends, life is about adapting. No matter how old you are, every time I learn something new, I feel a little more alive. Her journey is a testament to the idea that it's never too late to embrace change, and that the courage to try something unfamiliar can lead to a life filled with joy, connection, and endless possibilities. Part 7: Over-Reliance on Family for Support. John Gwynn was a man who loved his family above all else. A retired shopkeeper, he had spent his younger years working tirelessly to provide for his children, Michael and Anna. His dream was simple: to see them grow up, succeed, and live a life free of struggle. And they did. Michael became a software engineer, while Anna pursued her passion for teaching. John felt a deep sense of pride in their accomplishments. But as he grew older, he began to rely on them for everything. At first, it seemed harmless. John would call Michael to fix his computer or ask Anna to pick up groceries. When bills arrived, he handed them over to his children, trusting them to handle the payments. Even decisions about home repairs or medical appointments were deferred to them. "They're just better at these things," he would say. But over time, this dependence started to create subtle tensions. Michael, juggling a demanding career, found it hard to make time for every request, while Anna felt torn between supporting her father and managing her own family. Neither of them said anything to John. They loved him too much to complain, but he began to notice the exhaustion in their voices and the hesitations in their actions. One evening, while having dinner with his children, John brought up an idea about moving in with Anna to make things easier. The room fell silent. Finally, Michael said, "Dad, we love helping you, but we need you to try doing some things on your own." Anna nodded, adding gently, "It's not that we don't want to help. It's just that we want you to feel capable." Two, their words struck a chord. John realized that what he thought was love and closeness might actually be weighing them down. The next day, he decided to make a change. Started small. John walked to the grocery store, picking up items he needed and even chatting with the cashier, a young man who reminded him of his younger self. The walk left him feeling accomplished. Even if his legs ached a little, encouraged, he began tackling other tasks, paying bills online with the help of a simple guide Michael had written, scheduling his doctor's appointments, and even watching YouTube videos to learn how to fix a leaky faucet. The more John did for himself, the more his confidence grew. Tasks that once felt overwhelming now became opportunities for growth. He also noticed a shift in his relationships with Michael and Anna. Their visits felt lighter, more joyful, unburdened by the constant sense of obligation. Instead of running errands for him, they spent time talking, sharing meals, and laughing together. John saw that by reclaiming his independence, he wasn't just helping himself. He was giving his children the freedom to enjoy their time with him, free from the strain of caretaking. From a Buddhist perspective, John's journey embodies the principle of self-reliance, intertwined with interdependence. Buddhism teaches that while we are all interconnected, our true strength comes from cultivating our inner resources. Over-reliance on others not only diminishes our own growth, but can also create imbalance in our relationships. By stepping into his own power, John found a harmonious way to be part of his family while honoring his individual responsibility. The Buddha once said, "No one saves us but ourselves. No one can, and no one may. We ourselves must walk the path." John's initial dependence came from a place of love, but it overlooked this truth. The path to personal peace and fulfillment cannot be walked by others on our behalf. By reclaiming his agency, John not only found joy in his independence but also restored balance in his family dynamic. One afternoon, as John was fixing a squeaky cabinet door, Anna stopped by unexpectedly. Watching her father work, she smiled and said, "You've become quite the handyman, Dad." He laughed, replying, "I've had good teachers, you and your brother." Their relationship, once strained by obligation, now felt enriched by mutual respect and understanding. John's story is a reminder that independence isn't just about doing things for yourself. It's about preserving the dignity of those you love. When we rely too heavily on others, we risk eroding the bonds that connect us. But when we take responsibility for our lives, we give those bonds room to breathe, grow, and thrive. John didn't just regain his confidence, he deepened his connection with his family, proving that the greatest acts of love often come from the courage to stand on your own. Part 8. Unrealistic expectations and complaining. Diana Liu had always been a woman who cherished beauty. Beauty in her youth, her relationships, and the life she had built. She often reminisced about her younger years, when she could dance all night without fatigue, climb mountains with ease, and command attention wherever she went. The mirror, however, told a different story now. Her once smooth skin bore the marks of time, and her energy, once boundless, seemed to wane with each passing year. These changes unsettled her, and as days turned into months, Diana found herself trapped in a cycle of comparison, mourning what she had lost rather than embracing what she still had. Her closest friend, Helen, began to notice Diana's change in demeanor. Once vivacious and engaging, Diana now spent their afternoons together lamenting her aches, wrinkles, and how everything was better back then. Helen, who was no stranger to the struggles of aging, decided it was time for a candid conversation. One sunny afternoon, as they sipped tea in Diana's garden, Helen placed her hand on Diana's and said, "You know, we all lose things as we age, but have you ever thought about what you've gained?" Diana looked puzzled. "Gained? Helen, I've lost my figure, my energy, everything that made me feel alive." Helen smiled gently and gestured toward the garden around them. "Do you remember when you planted these roses? They've grown beautifully, haven't they? But they weren't always this way. They've weathered storms, endured winters, and yet here they are, thriving. You're no different. Stop counting what you've lost and start counting what you've gained." Helen's words lingered in Diana's mind long after their conversation. That evening, she walked through her garden, reflecting on the years she had spent nurturing it. She saw not just the blooms but the resilience of the plants, the way they thrived despite the challenges of seasons. It dawned on her that her life, much like her garden, was a testament to growth and transformation. The next morning, Diana decided to shift her focus. Instead of starting her day by inspecting the wrinkles on her face, she made a habit of writing down 3 things she was grateful for. First, it was difficult. Her mind, conditioned to dwell on losses, struggled to find blessings. But as the days went by, she began to notice small joys, the warmth of her granddaughter's hug, the laughter shared with her book club friends, the vibrant red of her roses in full bloom. These moments became her anchors, pulling her away from the tide of negativity. Gratitude transformed Diana's perspective. She started spending more time with her grandchildren, appreciating their energy and innocence rather than envying their youth. She revisited her love for painting, something she hadn't done since her 30s. Her days, once heavy with complaints, became lighter, filled with creativity and connection. Buddhism teaches that suffering often arises from attachment, not just to material things but also to ideas of how life should be. Diana's struggle was rooted in her attachment to a version of herself that no longer existed. By letting go of this unrealistic ideal and embracing the present moment, she began to find peace. The Buddha's teachings on impermanence emphasize that change is the only constant in life. Clinging to the past prevents us from fully experiencing the beauty of now. Diana's journey wasn't about denying the challenges of aging, but about choosing where to place her focus. Her wrinkles and aches didn't disappear, but they stopped defining her days. Instead, she found joy in what remained and what was still to come. Her thriving garden became a metaphor for her own life, a life enriched by experiences, relationships, and the wisdom that comes with time. One afternoon, as she painted the roses in her garden, her granddaughter Olivia sat beside her, watching intently. "Grandma," Olivia asked, "do you ever wish you were younger?" Diana paused and smiled. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but then I think about everything I have now, like you, and I wouldn't trade it for the world." Diana's story reminds us that aging, like all stages of life, is a mixture of losses and gains. By choosing to focus on gratitude, we can turn our perspective from one of scarcity to one of abundance. The changes in our bodies and lives are inevitable, but they also bring opportunities for growth, connection, and deep appreciation for the present moment. As Diana continued to nurture her garden, she found herself nurturing something far greater, her capacity to embrace life as it is, not as it was. Gratitude became her daily practice, a lens through which she viewed the world. And through this lens, aging transformed from a story of loss to a celebration of all that she had cultivated, both within and around her. Part 9. Isolation and Avoidance of New Experiences. Richard Vu had always been a devoted husband. For 40 years, he and his wife, Elaine, shared everything: dinners at their favorite restaurant, late-night conversations about the books they read, and dreams of the places they'd visit when they retired. But when Elaine passed away unexpectedly, Richard's world crumbled. The house they had filled with laughter now felt unbearably quiet, and the thought of venturing into the world without her seemed pointless. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, as Richard withdrew further into himself. His life narrowed to a monotonous routine of eating, sleeping, and watching television. His daughter, Linda, became increasingly worried. She would visit regularly, urging him to join her for lunch or to spend time with his grandchildren. But Richard always declined. "It's not the same without your mom," he would say. She understood his pain but also saw how isolation was consuming him. One Saturday morning, Linda stopped by with an idea. "Dad," she said, placing a brochure on the kitchen table, "there's a travel club for seniors in town. They plan trips, day outings, and even local coffee meetups. I think you'd enjoy it." Richard shook his head immediately. "I don't want to travel without your mom. It wouldn't feel right." Linda didn't push, but before leaving, she added, "Just think about it. Maybe meeting new people would help." A few weeks later, Richard found himself sitting in a cafe, his usual spot by the window. He wasn't sure why he had come out that day. It had been Elaine's favorite cafe, and maybe he just wanted to feel closer to her. As he stared at his coffee, lost in thought, an older man approached and asked, "Mind if I sit here? All the other tables are full." Richard nodded silently. The man, Paul, introduced himself, mentioning that he came here often with his travel club friends. "You should join us sometime," Paul said casually. Richard gave a polite smile but didn't respond. The next morning, Richard thought about Paul's invitation. Something about the man's easygoing demeanor had stayed with him. After a long inner debate, Richard decided to attend one of the club's weekly coffee meetups. When he walked in, the group greeted him warmly, and for the first time in months, he felt a glimmer of connection. They talked about their lives, their favorite trips, and places they still dreamed of visiting. Richard stayed quiet, listening, but when someone mentioned visiting the Grand Canyon, a place he and Elaine had always wanted to see, he found himself sharing his story. The group's encouragement was unexpected and genuine. A month later, Richard joined the club on a day trip to a nearby art museum. The experience was both intimidating and exhilarating. Being around new people and in a new environment made him nervous. But as the day unfolded, he realized how much he had missed the simple joy of discovery. The museum, bustling with life, reminded him of the many conversations he and Elaine used to have about art and history. Felt bittersweet but also healing. As the months passed, Richard became an active member of the travel club. He participated in local outings, attended weekly coffee chats, and even signed up for a group trip to Yellowstone National Park. Along the way, he formed new friendships with people who shared his love for learning and exploration. They didn't replace Elaine, but they added something new and valuable to his life. Through these connections, Richard found himself laughing again, sharing stories, and experiencing the world with fresh eyes. Buddhism teaches that suffering often arises from clinging, whether to the past, to attachments, or to the idea that our best days are behind us. Richard's initial retreat into isolation was his way of holding on to Elaine, of preserving the life they had built together. But by opening himself to new experiences, he began to understand the impermanence of all things, a cornerstone of Buddhist philosophy. The past, no matter how cherished, could not be his entire life. By embracing the present, Richard honored both his memories and the possibility of new joy. Another important Buddhist principle is interconnectedness, the idea that we are not separate from others but deeply connected to the web of life. Richard's loneliness was not just a result of losing Elaine, but of severing his ties to the larger world. By stepping into the travel club, he reconnected with that web, finding purpose and meaning in shared experiences. One evening, after returning from a particularly memorable trip to a nearby vineyard, Richard sat in his living room, looking at a photo of Elaine. "I miss you every day," he said aloud. "But you'd want me to keep living, wouldn't you?" He imagined her smile, her encouragement, and felt a sense of peace. The life he was building didn't diminish her memory. It expanded on the love they had shared. Richard's journey shows that loneliness isn't a wall that confines us, but a door waiting to be opened. It takes courage to step through, to leave behind the familiar and embrace the unknown. But on the other side lies connection, growth, and the possibility of joy. Through his travels and the friendships he made, Richard rediscovered the richness of life, proving that new experiences are not a replacement for the old but a continuation of the story. His life, once marked by grief and isolation, became a testament to resilience and the power of human connection. As our journey comes to a close, I want you to take a moment and breathe deeply. Think about everything we've explored today, the mistakes to avoid and the opportunities to embrace. Life in your later years is not defined by what you've lost, but by what you choose to gain. Every story we've shared, the man who found strength through daily walks, the teacher who rediscovered joy in puzzles, the grandmother who embraced technology to connect with family, reminds us of one simple truth: it's never too late to grow. Every choice you make today becomes the foundation for tomorrow's joy. Perhaps you've been holding on to old habits, clinging to the familiar, or hesitating to step out of your comfort zone. Let me remind you, aging isn't a loss. It's a transformation, a chance to step into your wisdom, share your gifts, and create moments that matter. I'll leave you with this thought. Imagine sitting in a rocking chair years from now, looking back on the life you've lived. What would you want to see? Is it laughter shared with loved ones? A sense of fulfillment from a life well lived? Or the quiet satisfaction of knowing you made choices that honored your body, mind, and soul? The golden key to aging well lies in your hands. Will you turn it? Take this moment to reflect on one thing you'll do differently starting today. Maybe it's nurturing your physical health, reconnecting with an old friend, or learning something new. Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear them. And don't forget, we're in this together. Join us at Lotus Light Teachings as we continue exploring the art of living fully at every stage. Remember, the best chapters of your story are still unwritten. Let's write them with intention, joy, and love.